And we're live.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I will call to order the City of Salem and Salem URA Finance Committee meeting for Monday, May 19th. I'm Chair Deanna Gwen.
Julie Roy.
Shane Matthews.
Vanessa Nordyke.
And staff.
Josh Eggleston, Chief Financial Officer.
Kristen Rutherford, Director of Community Planning and Development.
Dan Atchison, City Attorney.
Callie Leinenbach, Budget Manager.
Kelly Blake-Schmidt, Management Analyst.
And then online.
Jenny Matichek, Chief Accountant.
And Shonan Thomas, Admin Analyst.
Tammy, you're muted.
Sorry, Tammy Lurschweitzer, Moss Adams.
All right, and did everyone have an opportunity to review the minutes from our meeting of April 21st? And if so, do I have a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve the meeting from the
21st.
May 21st meeting, April 21st meeting.
Second.
All approved or all in favor? Aye.
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 We don't have anyone signed up for public comment, no action items. So it looks like we're looking for a management update. Is that you?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to turn it over to Tammy with Moss Adams. Go ahead, Tammy.
Great, and I'm gonna start out with the hardest thing. You hear me say it each time. But it's just, can I share the correct screen? Okay. Okay, I think you see everything there, right?
Yeah, we see the presentation.
Okay, great. Well, I am here to provide the committee with a performance audit update and also talk about next year's audit plan. So what we wanted to do today was to review progress on the prior priorities determined by the Finance Committee and then discuss options for next fiscal year's performance audit program. So just as a sort of brief reminder here, this is what has been approved in fiscal year 2025. We had the Enterprise Leadership Performance Audit, which was completed and presented to you all in February. The URA audit, which was presented to you and completed in April. We're in the midst of the risk management performance audit, which should be complete at the end of this fiscal year. And what we have here at the bottom of the slide is a potential opportunity to revisit another high priority item that the committee had determined was high priority in the fall, but ultimately we determined that there wasn't sufficient bandwidth by the fire department to take on an additional study. However, Moss Adams has realized cost savings across its consulting program and would like to provide the committee with the opportunity to look at the fire overtime as part of this fiscal year's program, and this work could get started in June of this year. So I wanted to pause there and see what discussion the committee would like to have and if you would like to be able to move forward with that work.
Thoughts, anybody? I guess I have a question in that, does it make sense to do that now when the EMS services are starting on July 1? I mean, to me, would it make more sense to wait until they've had an opportunity to start that program versus analyzing their overtime now? Because that workload is going to change with EMS services. I think it will.
Certainly. It very well could adjust with the EMS transition. Typically, when we're looking at an overtime study, we will go back 3 to 5 fiscal years to try to understand trends and the drivers for different overtime. So why is overtime happening? What are the controls in place or the mitigation strategies to reduce overtime based on those categories? The EMS transition could present additional categories for analysis, but those baseline categories would likely remain the same. So some of those categories could be, for example, workers' compensation, absences, vacancies. It could be community events. When we do this in Los Angeles, it's filming. But there could be some of those drivers that are still present even with the transition. So it's really up to the committee in terms of how you would like to be able to use the remaining funds in our contract, if this is the priority area, or if you'd like to revisit an alternative priority area.
If I may add just a little bit of context also, this was a priority for the City Efficiency Committee. So it's something that Chris and I feel strongly about moving forward with sooner rather than later. Just with fire being the largest user of overtime for the city, especially in the general fund. I think you're right, the EMS might have some impact, but I think just like Tammy said, kind of the baseline factors aren't really changing. Some of the call volume impacts might change as EMS moves forward. But as far as getting going, I think it'll bridge enough of the gap that it'll probably be okay. It'll probably be an asterisk.
I wish that you guys would have started with Tammy and Josh, or I'm sorry, Krishna and Josh feel that strongly that we should look at this sooner than later. Because that certainly changes my opinion.
I guess I'm still a little bit confused why. So problem with looking at overtime in my mind with the fire is we know that a large amount of their overtime is due to the EMS situation we have right now with bulk, right? And so in theory, us taking on the EMS, we should see a reduction in overtime just naturally, just by attrition and not having to have that. And so it seems like this seems like about 6 months too early in my mind to do the overtime study on fire, because it seems like you kind of need to know if us running our own EMS really did reduce the overtime as projected, or do we actually house a new problem where we still have the overtime and we're running our own EMS, but we won't actually have that vetted out. And so I guess that when we say like the standard things that are causing the overtime to be the same, to me, it doesn't seem like they really are standard to be the same, because we know we're having the EMS change that over time now.
So a little context, fire does a really good job tracking their overtime and especially what's attributed to the EMS. So it's pretty easy, even when we've responded to questions to the budget committee, we've peeled that out, shown it separately. So the baseline is still significant. There's still a large amount of overtime being spent just on maintaining the minimum staffing, paid leave organ, other impacts are still significant. I don't think it
Kelly
would be.
days, right?
The Kelly days are actually gone.
Okay.
They switched to the D shifts. Now there's 4
Okay.
shifts and they have
Debit days.
debit days.
Oh.
And that could be its own finance committee.
Yeah. Tisha.
Counselor Nordike, I think you had a
I
question
had
or
one.
comment. Oh, go ahead.
Just to add on to what Josh was saying, the city medic unit stopped running in October, and we've still seen significant overtime from fire this fiscal year without that cost, just for context.
So you'll see them around, but they're being operated in a training capacity by
EMS.
trainees, EMS staff.
Counselor Nordike?
Thank you, folks. And Councilor Gwen, I had the same knee-jerk reaction that you did, that isn't this a little early to be pulling the trigger on an audit of this particular department as they undertake this really significant change. We all know they're expected to go live on July 1 and that they've done a tremendous amount of work preparing for that. But I am really interested in seeing what this performance audit would look like after we've had enough data to show the before, which we have right now, and the after. So, I'm willing to support that audit, but I really, I wouldn't want to get an audit back from Moss Adams with just, say, a month of analysis after July 1. Like, I would like to see more than just how we did between July 1 and August 1, for example. So with that caveat, I would be interested in pursuing it. Again, I just want to reiterate, I want to make sure that I see some results. And the first 6 months might look dramatically different than the second 6 months under this new program. So I'm just wondering what the timing would be if Finance Committee were to recommend approval. What would the next step be? Does this need to go to council for a meeting for a vote by full council? And if so, all of that will buy us some time by the time Moss Adams gets around to it. And as indicated on the screen, they are already working on risk management. So I wouldn't expect they would start on this immediately. So my questions are about the timing of next steps.
And Tammy had said that they have 5 to 6 years to review. Do we know about how long that will take? Is that a multi-month effort?
I'll defer to Tammy on that question, but real quick on the question about city council. So city council assigned this work to the finance committee. So the finance committee is in the driver's seat on picking these programs. So it doesn't have to go back to the full city council for approval. And Tammy, could you speak to the timing of how the audit will
Yes.
play out?
Certainly, we had anticipated being able to initiate this work in June of this year and then conclude it in August or September. So we've had similar conversations around how do we evaluate the update for the EMS transition. And our concept would be that we would look back at the last 5 fiscal years in the categories of overtime, understand the drivers. As Josh had indicated, we can pull out EMS as a specific driver of overtime and quantify that. And then we would have a 3-month snapshot at the time of presentation to the committee to demonstrate any progress made on the EMS portion of that overtime after the transition. We also have the option, if the committee would like to entertain it, to come back in another year and evaluate the EMS portion of overtime specifically and just do a small follow-up audit specific to that, if that would be of interest.
So if I may, I think your options are, 1, just go forward as is. 2, defer it, which I don't think that's a bad decision if there's strong thoughts about deferring it, another 6 months if you really feel that we want to get EMS underway. Or you could do something like Tammy just said, do the full audit now and then do a short, small follow-up after implementation.
Counselor Nordike, I think you had your hand
I
raised.
did, yeah. Of those options, my preference would be to defer about 6 months or so for us to see what happens with this massive transition within the fire department. It sounds to me like the money is still available. It's not like it's going to expire. And we've had a great good faith relationship with Moss Adams. So it seems to me that if we have some money available to do it, I would just give us a little bit of time to see how the first 6 months go. That would be my preference, and use those savings towards doing this, but at a later time.
I guess my question would be, if we deferred, can we allocate these FY25 funds towards a different department and then use FY26 funds towards the fire?
I'm assuming, Tammy, that we'd want to select a different program to move forward with and then backfill just the overtime after that one. Is that correct,
Yep.
Tammy?
That is correct. And I'm happy to present a couple of options for that a little bit later in the deck if the committee would like to see those.
I would be interested in seeing those.
Okay, should we go over there now? I'll sort of go through a couple more slides and then we'll have 2 points for discussion. So I'll get you over there. Okay, so now we wanted to just update the committee on all of the different audits that we have been able to prioritize and complete to date, and then what is remaining from the previously prioritized list from last fall. So these were the items that were considered high priority. We talked about enterprise leadership. IT is on hold. It was put on hold in February, and we anticipate that would remain on hold through January. Fire we have just discussed, so I'll move on from that. These are the medium priority projects. So we have the URA audit, which was complete. We have an overtime study for police. We understand that at this point in time, the police department does not have capacity to be able to take on that work. So we're not recommending it at this exact juncture. We have a potential parks performance audit to look at workloads, community service, and staffing levels. We also had risk management, which is in progress. We also had code compliance, performance audit to look at those code compliance activities and priorities, and then a planning performance audit to be able to identify opportunities for improvement. However, we did complete a permit efficiency study in the last couple of years. And so just want to make sure that that's top of mind for the committee as well. So we have two questions for you with the fiscal year 2025-2026 program. The first was for the 25 program, do we want to move forward with the fire overtime study? We understand that is maybe not at this point. The second question that we have is whether the city would like to pause on determining the FY26 program for Moss Adams to be able to conduct an enterprise risk assessment, which is the mechanism that is the traditional way to be able to prioritize performance audit projects when we're doing this work with other clients. So I'll discuss a little bit about that. But just as a reminder, here are your approved project criteria. This has been the mechanism by which we've been prioritizing these different projects. And then these are the previously prioritized projects that are still remaining. So not listed on here what is the fire overtime study, but if we wanted to repurpose those funds for one of these projects, with the exception of, I would say, IT and police, we could look at parks, code compliance, or planning as a potential alternative project to replace the fire overtime study with. So parks, code compliance, or planning. Let's maybe just start with that question. Do either of those three projects interest the committee to be able to look at them instead of fire overtime starting in June?
Parks from a financial standpoint seems to make, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Parks seems to be an interesting one from a financial standpoint. I know the police, you said, kind of isn't on the table right now, but when it comes time for doing police, I guess I'd want to see a more broad thing than just an overtime study. I mean, I think when it comes to the community, they want to see officers on the ground. They want to see us responding to the calls. And so I think that a more broad thing than just an overtime study when we get to police would be pretty important. To be able to say, do we have the right ratios when we're looking at leadership versus officers and different things like that. But I think that of those three, I guess I'd be interested in like parks and planning.
If I may, just really quickly to the police one, I think one reason why it's so isolated is that we've had recent studies on the police department for their staffing analysis. So that's why it's really targeted to, hey, we haven't looked at this particular piece, but you could certainly adjust the scope. I would say parks, I think it could be an extreme challenge if the levy doesn't pass and they take a significant staffing cut to do an audit, directly following that. I think that could be a challenge. If it does pass and things are added, I think if things are status quo, I think it's probably appropriate and fine. Just one caution there.
Josh, on that, I mean, most of the data they're going to be looking at is past fiscal years, right? As far as staffing levels and allocation of resources, there might be an opportunity for the city to reimagine parks, whether it passes or not.
It could be. Tammy, do you have any advice there if it's past or present?
Yes, so we would take a historical look at parks. However, I do have the same caution that Josh has, because if there are cuts that are pretty severe to parks, it may be that our recommendations to adopt best practices are not feasible for the city, and the time required by staff to have input into the assessment, it may be very challenging to have that engagement directly after potential cuts are announced if the levy does not pass. So just with the employee experience, it may not be the best time if the levy does not pass to look at parks.
Councilor Nordijk, looks like you have your hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to weigh on this. I don't have a strong opinion on IT, parks, code compliance, or planning. I do acknowledge that, code compliance, that's a pretty small budget. And so there's only so much savings you can create when the budget itself is not even $2 million. And I think that's why one of the criteria that we look at for whether to, audit this project or that project, again, goes to overall program budget and employee count. So to that end, I am very interested in doing the performance audit for the police just because they're the single biggest ticket item in the general fund. And, the audit, the independent assessment that was done a couple of years ago, my recollection was it wasn't really about how to save overtime. What I hear from my community residents is they are always sharing their opinions with me on ways to cut costs. And I'll be the first to acknowledge, and many of them acknowledge this too, they know they're not sworn police officers, so they don't know what it's like to be an officer and why some ideas might sound great on paper, but in practice would not be practicable. But one example I get asked all the time about why don't our officers rely more on, I forget what they're called, but basically, mechanized ways of monitoring traffic, like red light cameras and such. And I know we've added some more to that extent. So I feel like if we're going to look at the scope, you could include looking at things like, the usage of AI, the usage of various forms of technology to reduce the burden on our police department. So I'm interested in doing that, but I also am hearing today that they just don't have the bandwidth to do that. I understand. I still would like to do it at some point. As for these other four, like I said, I don't have a strong opinion on any of them. I'm wondering why can we just put a pause on auditing until after we're in a better position to audit the fire department? Because I know we apparently we have some money available to conduct further audits, but I'm sure we don't have indefinite funds. So that's where I'm at.
Well, and our fire chief is not here, but what were his thoughts on doing an audit at this time of the fire department when the EMS is not on board yet?
A really good question. I haven't spoken with him about it. I'm assuming that Krishna has. She's unable to be here today. But if you want, we can pause and come back with more information. I did want to clarify, Tammy, with is the risk assessment something you're looking for feedback on, or is that something that we're programming regardless?
It's something that is being programmed regardless. And what we wanted to be able to just talk to the committee about was being able to use the results of that risk assessment to be able to form the FY 25-26 performance audit program, which is again the traditional way that our team typically works with clients on these performance audit programs. So I wanted to just verify that the committee was open to that. The enterprise risk assessment is something that we're already doing. That'll be starting in July, and that should be wrapped up around September. So we would essentially be able to present the results of that assessment to the committee in October, and then at that time assess the other areas that we would like to be able to look at in the next fiscal year, which may be the areas listed here on the slide, and they may be augmented with additional projects or adjusted to be able to be more all-encompassing.
What slide was she referring to? She was talking about risk assessment.
Oh, I think she just spoke to the risk assessment. Yeah, the assessment framework.
So when we're doing a risk assessment, these are the types of, this is the assessment framework that we use. So we use it's called the COSO ERM framework. I promise that you'll probably never have to remember that exact terminology. But essentially what we do is we look at about 18 different categories of risk all across the city. We look at the overall risk level. We look at the impact of a negative event occurring the likelihood that a negative event would occur, what preparedness does the city have in place to mitigate the impact of a negative event, and then the trajectory of that risk level given current conditions. And then that summarizes into some results. So this is an example from another client where we've done this enterprise risk assessment at another city. So you can see here a laundry list of different risk categories and then the risk level. And so this is the type of information that we would be coming back to you, and we would have very targeted ideas around what performance audits would be useful to be able to conduct to reduce overall risk and enhance efficiency at the city. And this is the results sort of break down into these three different areas of looking at what is the purview of council in terms of policy direction, outcomes, senior management in terms of those policies, procedures, governance, succession plans, and then departmental processes as well.
Thank you, Tammy. I
So
think, sorry, go ahead.
we would like to propose that we do take a pause on the remainder of these projects until the time that the risk assessment can be complete, to be able to determine which of these would be the most beneficial and have the biggest bang for your buck, essentially.
So what kind of delay does that cause? I mean,
We're definitely delaying IT and police based on current staff limitations. We have the option to start fire overtime, parks, code compliance, or planning in June. And then what we would like to propose is that we hold off on any further audits after that until the enterprise risk assessment can be completed and we're able to present that to the committee.
Any idea when that might be?
That would be in October that we would be able to come to you and present that list or of options and then have discussion around your priorities.
can I ask a question that maybe it's obvious, but what is the cost for that enterprise risk assessment?
Yeah, the cost for that enterprise risk assessment, it's part of the Moss Adams program overall, so it's already budgeted. Right now it's at $50,000.
So, I mean, I'll give you my opinion on the enterprise risk assessment. I don't see enough value in it for 50,000. We know that ultimately, at least it's my understanding, we kind of want to move these audits throughout the departments as a whole. And so the order we go, while I think it could be helpful, I'm not sure it's $50,000 helpful and a delay of time. That's my opinion, obviously. For me, I would rather us pick something today to kind of keep this process moving, and as opposed to doing an enterprise risk assessment, I'd rather just move right into another department during that time that we would have done an enterprise risk assessment. That's just my opinion, though, that I don't get enough value out of that when I know that my objective is to move through each department by the end of this.
Yep, understood. And the enterprise risk assessment is not only for the purpose of prioritizing these performance audits. It's intended to be able to serve as a tool for city management to identify risk mitigation strategies for themselves. And so it's just not solely for the purpose of doing this prioritization, but we certainly hear you that you'd like to keep this work moving forward, and we're happy to do that as well.
Pardon?
Vanessa,
I think she was giving you a thumbs up.
oh. So I think the biggest.
She did a thumbs
Okay,
up.
all right.
Yes, that is correct.
So it sounds like we need to either decide on a department today or whether we're not doing one. Is that where we're at?
Well, and I personally, and I'm only one, but I personally would rather just hold off until next month and get more input from you and Krishna, and perhaps even from our fire chief on, does it make sense to do this now and start? But I'm fine if you guys want to do something different.
Are we still good with the FY24 fund or 25 funds if we were to wait till finance meeting next month? Or past our?
I mean, that's a good question. Well, we passed the carryover deadline, but we could carry over the funds. It's likely not going to be a challenge just with how we program the resources next year. It would just kind of shift everything a little bit. Yeah.
I mean, it was meaningful to me when you said that it's important for you and Krishna to do it sooner than later. That carries weight with me. So I don't want to discount that and move on to something else without more information.
Yeah, and I think perception wise, overtime is a challenge, right? It's a real cost that's pretty significant. So understanding that is important, but pushing it off a month or even 6 months isn't going to be the end of the world, I don't think. So if you'd like to wait, that's okay too.
I can support the idea of let's wait till next month. Let's gather more information from the chief during this month and the city manager or interim city manager when she's able to get back. And kind of making a decision next month on whether we do fire or what we do.
Vanessa, Councilor Nordag?
Yeah. No worries. Yes, I agree with all of that. And yeah, in other words, yes, I agree with all of that. And I feel like there's something else I was going to say, but yes. So, I mean, a part of the reason for waiting till next month, in addition to getting feedback from the fire chief and so on, is, the fate of this levy will really determine our finances in a big way. And for that reason alone, I feel it's appropriate that we be really mindful about what our costs are going to look like in terms of consultancy costs. I know that Krishna and her entire team did a really excellent job immediately implementing some temporary cost controls this year. And that included things like minimizing overtime except for mandatory staffing levels, no new overnight travel. There were a lot, and I think no new, consultant fees, I believe, was on that list as well. So I think we should be stretching this existing consultancy budget as best we can and in a way that is prudent. It does mean that sometimes it feels like scraping butter over too much bread. But, we're going to have a big decision by the voters in 48 hours. And I think it's worth waiting on a few things until after we've heard on frankly, the fate of our general fund.
Do you need a motion for that?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
The direction is understood. So, all good. Thank you, Tammy.
Are we
Pleasure.
moving on to our 2024-25 third quarter investment report?
Exactly right. And I don't have a lot to go over here. If I may, Kelly, can I just kind of walk through it a little bit with the mouse? I don't think we've spent a lot of time on one of these, and I think it could be helpful just to kind of walk through what's included.
Oh, you need to share your screen, Josh. Sorry.
Way better with all the scrolling to not have been sharing.
So if you haven't looked at one of these, it has a lot of good information. So the economic snapshot is really interesting to just look at the comparison for where we're at. Interest rate overview for U.S. Treasury notes, which we hold quite a bit of. Index returns. The account summary, probably this first page is probably the biggest, has the most information that could be relevant for all of you. So the market value, how much money we have invested across areas. The portfolio yield on cost, 3.64%. The weighted average maturity. So if you think we're investing either between 1 and 5 years, so especially right now we're at the 0.78. So we're pretty close with how we're holding investments. A lot of other information, including our actual corporate holdings, are listed here. It all meets our investment policy guidelines as far as diversification. The other one I'll point out, sorry for the scrolling. Oh, one thing you might not be aware of, and actually, Mayor, we were talking about this morning. is that each of our bond portfolios are invested separately. So a lot of our cash is actually held in common. So if you think about the general fund, utility fund, self-insurance, those are all held in basically one portfolio, and then we allocate cash and interest across different areas. Our bonds are invested specifically for those areas as required by the IRS and reporting. So we collect interest on bonds, and it's for each individual portfolio. The Finance Committee, let's see, it's got to be 4 or 5 years ago now, added ESG, so environmental, social, and governance overview. So we do have a section just looking at the ESG risk composition by our holders. We're still in compliance, but you can see the ESG risk ranking here. I think it's always interesting to look at the various holdings and their ESG risk by category or by holder. We did have a question a few Finance Committee meetings ago. Amazon.com was our highest risk at that time. It was close to 30%, which is kind of where our cutoff is for where we divest and reinvest somewhere else. But it's come down a little bit to that 26.1. So if you're ever looking for some light reading, it's actually interesting walking through that stuff. And then the detail about the actual transactions is included here. So a lot of information. If you're ever wanting to walk through it, I'm happy to walk you through it.
Josh, can I ask a question?
Mhm.
So the yield percentage up there at the top, is about
3.74.
Yeah. So is that what our actual return is on this basis on average?
So it fluctuates quite a bit. So I can bring back what I can do is show you our like return over time. I think that could be helpful just as a Finance Committee item, because we've seen some fluctuation there. But yeah, portfolio yield on costs would be that 3.64%
So that I know how to,
annualized.
so I can like gauge that in my mind on what that actually means. So like if I go look at my like investment portfolio and if I have all my stuff in the S&P and I get a 10% return, that's the same type of number here.
Correct.
So
I guess with the one caveat is we have a lot of money sitting in the bank, right? Just for liquidity needs. The local government investment pool, dollars sitting there, and the rest is in treasury bonds or in those corporate stocks.
okay.
And as far as like the risk, we're pretty conservative. We don't want to get ourselves out there and lose funds. So 3.64 is not what you'd want like for a stock portfolio if you're looking for retirement. But as far as investing fund balance, it's not bad.
It's not bad. Okay.
And the
Looks like
LGIP,
Counselor Nordike might have a question, sorry.
oh, I was just gonna say the LGIP, which is where we hold a lot of our cash, is 4.25%. I think that was the latest update.
Yeah, it gets adjusted occasionally. The state adjusted.
It's been going down over the last year.
Yeah, but still not
Still
bad
good,
for
Still good.
the LGIP is like cash, so we can access it the same day. So it's a pretty good return for.
Counselor Nordike, did you have a question?
Yes, I did, about treasuries. I was looking at agenda packet, page 21. That was the one showing sector distribution. It said we had over 242 million in treasuries. Am I understanding that correctly?
I believe so, yes.
And I'm just curious, how do you, I think this might be, I see the maturity distribution on the right-hand side of that. Is that just spread out across all sectors? Or is that specific to treasuries for maturities?
I believe that's all sectors. We could bring it back specifically, like the information would be in the specific transactions at the back of the portfolio packet. But we could bring that back if you're interested specifically for treasuries. And that fluctuates for a few reasons. Sometimes we're holding fund balance for a long time, so we can put it out several years. Other times, like in the general fund, we get property taxes in November, 80 million, $70 million all at once, but we're going to need to access it fairly quickly. So we don't put that out very far. So it just kind of depends, if it's the baseline, how soon we would need funds based on how we how far are we invested out there? But we could bring back specifically for the US Treasuries more information.
Yeah, I honestly, I am just curious. I mean, I don't have a background in finance, so I am, and I appreciate the fact that we do so much in terms of treasuries because they are widely understood, even by financial amateurs like myself, to be pretty safe investments. I guess I'm just wondering, how do we decide strategically, like how long do you pick a 1-year treasury, a 2-year treasury? How do you make those decisions in a way that's intentional, that's maximizing our rate of return, making sure we have enough cash on hand? It seems like that's a very complicated series of decisions. Do we make all of that in-house? Do we contract with a financial advisor? Is that something that CFOs get together and discuss? I'm just kind of curious what the process is for investing our money.
I think it's yes to all of the things you mentioned, actually. So yeah, we have a financial advisor. So if we're looking to reinvest maturities, if we know that, $3 million of treasuries are coming to maturity and we don't need the liquidity, we'll ask for an investment option to push it back out. And those really depend. So, going back to the bond program, we have a pretty strict project plan of when those dollars are going to be spent. So we have a better idea there of when we're going to need them. So we can invest them out, 9 months, 12 months, based on when the projects are going to actually happen. For some of the other areas, it really is a combination of, history, where we're trying to target for that weighted average maturity. Right now at the 0.78, it's probably low. We'd like that to be a little bit higher. But it really depends on the market and where we're looking at reinvesting. It also, when you get a large influx of funds, like when we get property taxes, that's when you're likely to make those big shifts of moving dollars around. So, but we can bring more information back if you're interested about specifically how we make those decisions.
I might be. I'd be curious to hear if anyone else in the group is interested in that. And, the reason being is that, again, we're going to know in about 48 hours, certain types of financial decisions we're going to have to make. And so I think our investing decisions need to be made against the backdrop of our deficit in our general fund. And I'm sure you have that in mind when you make our investment decisions. I just want to make sure I'm saying that out loud because that might, if the voters are to turn this down, how should that affect how much we invest and how much cash we keep on hand? I'm hoping, and I actually feel pretty good that this is going to pass, but if not, then, I would like to know if we're going to make any pivots in our investing decisions based on the vote that comes out later this week.
Yeah, I'd be interested in seeing that. I'd be interested in seeing just kind of the strategy for how we invest. And then it looks like we have about 85 million or so is kind of what we do into the actual like corporate type stock, and 17% approximately. And I'd be interested to know kind of what our gauge is, just because 3.64, even on just that amount, just seems really low. And so I guess I'd be interested to know what is our actual growth on just that amount, because this 3.64 kind of brings in all the treasuries and everything else.
Right.
I guess I'd be interested to know just what's our portfolio growth on that.
Yep, we can bring that back, no problem. If it's okay with the chair, we'll just plan on, a presentation on kind of the breakdown of the portfolio, the return on investment for different categories, and kind of walking through that decision matrix. That's okay.
If you would like to share that, that would be awesome.
The recent Moody's downgrade of the federal government, do you see that having any impact on any of our investments?
It's really tough to tell. The dollar is still, the standard. So it's really challenging for me to think that it would really impact it too significantly. I think it's more political than anything else. But that's my gauge.
Is that the extent of your report?
It is.
So do we have continued or new business?
We don't have any continued business. I don't know if there's any new business. Nothing from us.
Anyone have any new Oh, Counselor Nordike.
I had a lot of caffeine this afternoon, madam. I think I heard Director Rutherford in the background, and that prompted another question for me, if you know the answer to it. There are a lot of big construction projects that are supposed to be breaking ground in Salem, and I don't have the faintest idea how interest rates or their ability to get the loans they need to actually break ground on these projects is looking these days. Do you have a sense of what that market looks like right now, or is that outside your purview?
We've been hearing from different developers that capital is tight, getting tighter. But we also have some really big projects that are still on track to move forward, like the, Mosaic project that's down off of Kubler, hasn't shown signs of slowing down at all. But like I said, with others, we're hearing that they are having challenges. So, and I don't know if it's just the lending environment or it's the combination of the lending market and costs of materials that's just, causing them to go back and revisit projects.
Thank you.
Anyone have anything else?